Welcome to another episode of Go-to-Market Mavericks, the podcast about go-to-market innovators, risk takers, and leaders, and the unique strategies, tactics, and playbooks they use to succeed. On with me today is Silvia Valencia, VP of Revenue Marketing at Docebo, a leader in the professional learning space. Prior to her time at Docebo, she spent time in various marketing and demand gen roles, having most recently spent time at Refine Labs. When she has a spare moment, she spends much of her time in and around Miami. She moved there recently for the sunshine. She also enjoys travel, especially when it involves hiking spectacular mountains, a hobby that has taken her to the peaks of Kilimanjaro and Mont Blanc and others. Most of all, she enjoys time spent with her family and her dog. Sylvia, I'm excited to have you on today.
Hey, nice to be here.
Awesome. Well, what I would love to, looking at your background and experience, and as you and I have discussed, I think it would be really useful for our audience to have you dive into the learnings you picked up as you've tried to you've gone about winning the pipeline game, especially when operating in an enterprise scenario or a larger company. I think you've got some really an interesting background and a unique perspective to shed light on that. But before we dive deep into that general topic, would love to just get the context that you're operating in right now there at Docebo. So a little bit about you, in fact, like a little bit about how you arrived there at Docebo, how you arrived in revenue marketing, and then a little bit more about the motion you're running there, and in general org structure, and anything that can help our audience understand some of the where you're operating from today.
Sounds good. So a little bit about my background. My first role actually was in business development, which at the time when I took this job right out of school, I didn't know that it was sales. I just read that it was business
Right.
development and I thought I have a bachelor in business, it makes sense. Surprise, I got there first day and it was cold calling. So that was a little bit of a shock, but that experience I think really formed my path in marketing. It obviously brought a lot of awareness to, hey, what would it be like if instead of chasing these people, they actually came to me, a little bit better enabled and prepared for what we're actually selling. So I transitioned into marketing at that first organization. And then since then, most of the jobs that I've held have been in demand. And I think something really interesting is, this balance between art and science. I think the science piece comes a little bit more naturally to me, and it's something that I've had to, make sure that I balance well, because as I've gotten more tenure, I understand that the art piece is equally, if not more important as you go into complex cycles and, multiple stakeholders. And, as you really try to get better at marketing, balancing that is really important. So, I think in the last several years of my career, I've become less attached, like hardcore die by the MQLs type of person that I used to be. I used to count how many leads we got every day, every hour. I would be on top of that game at all times. And, the last few years have really taught me how to actually be a little bit more audience driven and business driven in terms of, hey, you should care about what matters to the company, and leads is not that. And what actually matters to the audience, which is not filling out a form, it's solving a business or, in general, a pain point that they're going through. So, I'm at Docebo right now as VP of Revenue Marketing. Fun fact is I used to work at Docebo a few years ago, and I am a boomerang, happily so. When I was at Docebo, we were a very small company, about 100 employees, and I got a real taste of that, growth stage and the passion of the leaders at Docebo, and that really, it left such a strong impact on just overall how I developed as a marketer that I was like, I obviously said yes the moment that the opportunity roles to come back. And yeah, the current setting is revenue marketing at Docebo consists of several functions, your usual demand functions like paid channels, organic website. Also, we have a function in optimization, in expansion, and customer marketing, as well as our international um, regions. And the team is about 20 or so awesome marketers. And yeah, happy to dive into anything as the conversation evolves.
Yeah, I love that background. I too started out in business development, as they say, and I it's a path that isn't extremely clear. I think a lot of people get started in tech and business development. Would love to get your quick take on maybe indications for sales development reps, business development reps, account development reps out there who find themselves in that situation or in that role. Indicators that might suggest they are maybe cut for marketing or that that's a path that they should consider, as opposed to maybe the more traditional sales development to account executive path.
Yeah, I think it maybe is like if you find yourself wondering what triggers the audience to do certain things, getting in the mind of the audience in a way, understanding the psychology of it. But I think most importantly is I think every salesperson has it in them, but so do marketers, which is how can you be a resource that people actually want to hear from? That was my biggest, I think, I guess, calling since I've been even in that job in business development is I want to be the type of marketer that people actually want to hear from, which if, we put ourselves in the shoes of the audience is really not that many. Look at your inbox. You don't want to hear from 80% of the emails that you get, right? So how are we that 110% of companies that actually provide value? If that's kind of what makes you feel a little bit, you know, um, makes you feel a spark inside, I feel like marketing could be something interesting to explore.
I like that. I like that answer. For me, and I like it because it's actually different than what brought me over to the marketing side. I personally realized that at the time I really loved building tests and experimenting, and
Mhm.
also really kind of thinking about the holistic picture beyond sales as well. So, yeah, I really appreciate you getting your perspective on that. 'Cause it's a question I think a lot of, people earlier on in their career, they have, and they're wondering, "Hey, what do I do from here now that I've got this experience?"
Yeah, of course. And jumping into marketing as a with a sales background is such an incredible asset, especially in demand, but even I would say product marketing or like anything that really you feel passionate about. I as a as someone that hires people, I value that so much. And if anyone from a business development or sales background wants to jump into demand, that's a huge plus.
Yeah, agreed. Well, hey, you mentioned in your, background that you provided, thank you, all of these different functions that currently, report into you, that you work with, and, in kind of service of the overarching, topic that you and I are talking through today of winning the pipeline game in the enterprise. I'm wondering, can you maybe share some thoughts on, common missteps and maybe winning approaches when it comes to getting cross-team alignment? Whether it's aligning on our ICP, aligning on goals, specific definitions. Would love you to have you walk us through what you think and how you think about, driving alignment, between teams.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I think honestly, it alignment is fairly straightforward if you are in a smaller organization because it's yourself and a leader in the sales team, and you get in the meeting room or Zoom call, and then you hash it out over a couple hours, and that's it. But it gets significantly more complex when you think of implementing these ideas or like philosophies or frameworks across teams of hundreds of people, then the complex scenarios begin to come up pretty often. But I think the foundation of alignment is have strong alignment in what are you accountable for as a marketing organization and what is the sales team accountable for. Like when you get to a meeting room and you're shaking hands, it's a team effort. What are you committing to? What are you putting on the table? And what are they putting on the table? For example, marketing is accountable for pipeline generation, and the sales team is going to commit to a win rate of X, right? So that when our win rate like fluctuates ideally in a positive direction, we can see a surplus in revenue one because marketing is providing X amount of pipeline. And say, for example, if on the contrary, win rate is going down, marketing, we made an agreement. It's not like, hey, now you got a 2X pipeline, right? So I think understand what is each team in the cross-functional table accountable for. Ideally, one core metric, but that is usually married to a bunch of other primary and secondary leading indicators and lagging indicators. So I think just understand where you stand as a marketing team. I feel like that's often um, a little bit wishy-washy across many
Mm,
organizations, right? It's like, oh yeah, we talk to our CEO if you're a small startup or a growing company about leads all the time, but we are accountable to pipeline, right? If what you're accountable is pipeline, then you shouldn't really talk about leads, is the story that
mhm,
we
mhm,
tell also. And it's tricky for us because we have an amazing month and we blew leads out of the water, and you want to say it and you want to call it a win, but if what you're accountable to is pipeline, then you just got to control that narrative a little bit. So alignment on what are you actually responsible for is key. So just figure out, what are you going to measure? Are you primarily accountable for SQO or pipeline or SAL or whatever you want to call it? Revenue mostly, or are you a very unit based business, right? Like in more commercial sales where average deal size isn't, the name of the game. Perhaps what you really want to account for is the number of units and also the amount of revenue of the deals that you're bringing in. And then just any metric for a lead, or I should say for a hand racer, whatever you
mm.
want to call it, MQL, MRL, like PQL, like whatever naming you actually want to put behind it, someone that you can consider. This is a good measure of how many people are actively looking at what we sell. Whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. So I think the foundation of cross-functional alignment really lies on a shared agreement of what each team is going to contribute and just really clear, simple definitions.
Perfect. I think, going taking what you've just shared, which was amazing, by the way, thank you, and connecting it back to something you shared earlier on, specifically that you no longer are and MQLs are the be all end all, I think is something that you said earlier on. Uh, w- would love to understand, what are the changes you've noticed either in yourself or in organizations broadly that's led you from this perspective of, we need to measure MQLs, need to be on top of that number, or like wake you up in the middle of the night, the number, to where you're at today, which is clearly more focused on, well, from my, from your explanation, it appears you're more focused on pipeline. What's kind of led to that shift for you? And then maybe, are you noticing a similar shift in others, or do you feel like people need to get on that train more so than they are?
Definitely, there's been a shift. Because I think just, we all went through the pre and COVID boom of expansion and
Mhm.
growth at all costs, and let's just freaking throw money at things. And in those scenarios, like it's easier to attach ourselves to vanity metrics or leading indicators. I don't think all leading indicators are useless. Absolutely not. But I do think that it's easy. If you want me to get 1,000 leads this week, I can. Like, just, we are. creative. We can put some sort of pop-up somewhere and like put a form behind it and call it a day. But what really matters to the business is making sure that you are, you know, building an engine of efficient and scalable revenue. And that isn't measured on leads, right? It's an indicator for that bigger step, but it's not something that even I think myself could really feel proud of, as saying, "Oh, I brought 5,000 leads." So it's like, so what, right? It's I influenced X percentage in revenue, or I increased qualified business pipeline by X percentage year over year. Then you're talking a little bit more about what actually influences a company at the end of the day. So I think it was a combination of, the environment that we're in changing, getting a little bit, I wouldn't say strict, it's just better, honestly. It's going to make us into better marketers to care about what actually moves a business forward.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Okay, you mentioned alignment is really about aligning on what you're going to agree to deliver, right? As within your portion of the business.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, another area of alignment for me that I've noticed is sometimes it goes through many iterations and can cause a lot of whiplash for downstream teams. Would be if you're constantly shifting your definition of ICP, for example, right? Because your ICP is kind of baked into your overarching goals.
Mhm.
What are some experiences maybe of yours that maybe have taught you good, maybe bad ways of going about aligning, like coming up with your ICP, sticking, and aligning on it, and ensuring that everybody understands who you're actually going after, because that does in fact cascade into everything else that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very attached to the first point, which is aligning what you're delivering, right? And if you understand what makes a qualified business opportunity for your business, usually it's very catered towards the type of companies that are, best fit for what you're selling. Ideally, also well aligned with the type of customers that succeed, that end up renewing, that end up attaching more products, that end up having higher ARR, or just a better fit for your organization. Um, Usually, if you're aligned to pipeline or any forecastable deal metric, then naturally your efforts will lean towards, hey, like the noise doesn't matter. Let's really hone in. But I do think that it's easy to say, let's just like make a ton of noise, like go wild with the resources that we have, or really just even, I think it's a bit of a naive approach, but we all have great ideas that could serve many audiences, but really not honed into who we actually, really are trying to compel. So I think um, it's important to do a segment sort of approach. One of the first things that I did when I came into Docebo was super scrappy sort of assessment, but where is our pipeline? Like, show me a spreadsheet. I downloaded it myself. This is our pipeline. This is who they are. These are the types of companies. These are the regions. These are the channels. How much are we spending, right? Like on another tab, literally, this is how much we're spending. This is the approximate, quote unquote, cost association of the channels, of the sources, of the leads. Where are we spending money and who is coming to us, right? That was one of the first things that I tried to analyze was whatever ICP we have, let's put that aside. Who is actually interested in your product today? And that can probably tell you a ton about who you're actually compelling. If you're compelling a lot of SMB and commercial business and you're really striving to go enterprise, then are you targeting the right audiences? Is your messaging on point? Do you actually understand enterprise pain points? Is it something else? So one of the first things that I did again was just analyze that and try to skew budgets in the channels that you can. Because let's be real, you can't control too closely your direct traffic or like your organic branded search, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
where you can control the audience as best as possible. So I broke it out into segments and I brought that up and said, this is approximately the the audience makeup of who we attract today. If we could choose what type, which of these segments, right, do we want to prioritize? And if you begin there, I think the rest is pretty straightforward, right? A conversation with your sales leaders or with your leadership team overall, and just understand who is your core ICP segment. And then what you have to do as a marketer is say, with the resources I have, is it feasible for me to serve all of these audiences or not? Majority of the time, I think it's a no, because usually, unless we're talking about industry and segment differences, you can't be everything to everyone. And that's something that many people say and preach. And it's really, really true because, you can't have the same messaging, the same pain points if you actually do audience research, which is a huge component as well. Something I highly recommend. You get in your first 90 days, you should have either customer conversations or an audience survey or some sort of thing to ground you to the audience. Um, but yeah, just choose your segment, make sure that that's aligned to what the business expects of you as a marketing team, and make sure you're at least excellent at, one thing, one segment, one core ICP.
Basically, what you're saying is that, we talked about alignment. You've got to be aligned on not only the metric, but you also need to be aligned on the ICP. And I really like your point about if you're aligned on the right metric, it's going to be really hard for you to um, wiggle on your ICP and actually hit the number. Now, the other point that you made that I really thought was insightful, and I hope everybody caught, was especially when you're starting out, coming in fresh to a new organization, it's helpful to do, to some extent, a gap analysis. You're coming in as a new person, fresh eyes, fresh perspective, and don't take for granted that there may be areas where you're actually not inviting and appealing to the audience that you've declared, that the organization has declared you're going after. So really appreciate that message there. So you've aligned. I'm curious now to maybe shifting gears slightly when it comes to systems, tooling. Sure, like tooling is part of systems, but what are some of the must-have revenue systems and like the data foundation required at maybe a larger organization, and maybe like those that are just required no matter where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
And take this. You can interpret this question as you will, and I'll ask follow-ups if as it makes sense.
Yeah, honestly, I think the specific systems and tools, I think the larger you go, the more you realize that most systems can get you to the same place. It's about who who is leading those systems, right? The core teams, revenue operations, sales, marketing, and strong alignment between all of you. If you have an issue about attribution, and then you're going to blame it on the system, but honestly, it's rarely I think that's the solution. Something actually that I think is really awesome at Docebo that I haven't had in other roles is that marketing operations doesn't report into marketing. It reports into a different revenue operations department that is more, I guess you could say, unbiased. I've been part of other organizations where marketing ops sits with marketing and we create our own reports, but then sales ops doesn't agree with the report, right? And they're like, no, you used the wrong filters. That's not the object. That's not how you do it. You gotta think of these other things. In
Mm.
the way that we have it organized here, there is rarely scrutiny under the data that marketing pulls together because it all comes from the same center of excellence, right? So I think that has made my life so much easier. And also, at our scale, at least, we have a very well-enabled team of revenue operations, revenue strategy, data and intelligence that really they're true experts. I thought I knew I was on top of my game for reporting, but compared to them, they really know what they're doing. So I think if you're a bigger organization, relying on the experts and making sure that you also take the time to explain to them the little bit of context, that's important. Usually teams that are sitting in other places like finance, like RevOps, they're going to have their own idea about what marketing is and what marketing is supposed to do. And if you don't take the time to walk them through your strategy, through your way of thinking, through the philosophy, the 2025 strategy, how do you expect them to ask different questions, right? How do you expect the finance leader to stop coming to you about leads when what you're trying to drive is pipeline? If you don't take the time to show them a little bit of that world. So I think in terms of going back to your question, systems, I am not that picky anymore. I used to be. I was like, I only like HubSpot and Salesforce, and in these ways I want the tools to talk to each other. Now I'm more like, depends where the organization is, what do people like, and let's just make it work. Um, but yeah, I think it's stronger. I have stronger visions and, like, ways of working on alignment and, like, it like team agreements more than the specific systems.
Got it. Yeah, what I'm hearing is that so especially in larger organizations, and I've seen this happen before as well in previous roles. Uh, Common room isn't quite there yet, but we're getting there. To where you've got data being pulled from multiple sources, and ultimately, there's questions about the data across the organization because you're all pulling from different views, or you have different definitions that you're working off of entirely, and that takes a while. And so that creates friction and grind, and it slows things down. The operational gears slow down, which really matters, right, in bigger organizations.
Hmm.
Um, Sylvia, you've actually worked at bigger organizations and relatively smaller organizations. Um, I mean, to what extent, I mean, in your experience, is that a big problem? I mean, in bigger organizations, is kind of the like bureaucratic misalignment, like, is that a have you seen it be a problem? Have you? I guess I'm just curious. Like, is that something that marketing and demand gen leaders should be considering when they think about how they like work with different teams?
Yeah, it can definitely be a problem. It all goes back to, I think, top down goals, right? Top down asks of each department. Um, if your leaders are, um, being asked for different things, and it naturally creates friction that can easily be evolving into all sorts of, you know, unnecessary inefficiency, all the way through the marketing and sales organizations. But if your leaders are clear about what they're delivering and in which way to each other, it makes things a lot easier. An easy way to know if you are aligned to other business partners is, what are you compensated on and what are they compensated on? Most demand gen roles have some sort of variable component that is an incentive of sorts associated to one thing, right? So are you incentivized on leads or pipeline or revenue? And what is your, partner in another department that you work closely with, sales or business development or sales development, compensated on? How does that vary, right? Like, are they incentivized if they win more in a specific segment or in a specific region? And are you also aligned to that, or are you not? So I think um, commission or sales incentives and marketing incentives are important to align. At Docebo, for example, I also am very lucky that myself and our leader of business development have almost identical compensation structures in the way of we are aligned on what we get our variables on, period, right? And in our case, we don't have a ton of friction because I signed up to be accountable for all pipeline of all sources, whether I control them directly or not. And so did he. So what we how we end up at the end of the game at the end of the day is we want to achieve the larger goal. How we get there, to us, it ultimately doesn't matter. Now, it doesn't
Mm.
mean that we are not looking at inbound or outbound or all sorts of other channels, but we are focused on driving the core business goal, what's better for the company instead of what's better for individual channels or sources, if that makes sense. So I kind of deviated from your original question, but I think
No, it's
if you get into bigger organizations, it usually is top down goal. It seems so basic, but honestly, what are people incentivized to do? And then that cascades down into all the friction you can get.
yeah. What are you incentivized to do? What gets publicly rewarded is another thing that I've seen work really well, right? Like who, because people watch, people pay attention. Who
Mhm.
is getting the award at the annual event? Who is getting app mentioned in Slack or Teams or whatever internal tool you use to
Yeah.
saying, hey, great job, so and so. Like, what are those people doing? Anyway, yeah, I you actually set up the next question really well with your explanation there. You talked a little bit about how you're focused on the overarching goal, which is all pipeline. That's what you signed up to, and that's what your sales counterpart has signed up to, and that you work together. And it's not that you throw out in the concepts of inbound, outbound, tracking that. Yes, yes. Um, this is kind of getting into attribution territory, and figuring out which efforts have led to which results. Um, and you have really unique experiences having worked at Refined Labs and some other companies where there's a lot of discourse, at least even publicly on LinkedIn, about the dark funnel and tracking and honestly some pretty hot takes on attribution itself. I'm curious, Sylvia, from your perspective, um, what are some of the uh, I guess, winning patterns you've seen for teams that are trying to figure out attribution? And maybe what are some of the places where teams get jammed or where like it is almost counterproductive, this effort of attributing, effort to result?
Yeah, for sure. It's a tricky one. I think it also depends on the stage that you're at, the resources that you have. At the beginning, I think a lot of organizations, and even as you mature, you're going to invest a lot in acquisition efforts because when you are growing, you got to, prove out your market fit. You have to. I think there's a little bit less potential like issues around what is what because what you're trying to do is win. As you get bigger, you want to be more efficient. And I think even nowadays, the call for efficiency is across all stages and sizes. But I think where we go wrong with attribution is attribution shouldn't be a perfectly laid out, timeline of sources and events that is going to give you the magic recipe that you just got to put in a little bit more money behind to 5x your results. I think that is just not what attribution is going to do anymore. I think we have to understand that buyer cycles are complex. They have multiple touch points. People jump in and out of our traditional funnel stages, awareness and
Mhm.
consideration and evaluation, and then blah, 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 blah. The ones that we were taught by, HubSpot, which are still very relevant and, important,
Mhm.
but there is like we're getting a little bit, I think, to a stage where it's gonna get harder and harder to depict where people are at, and that should be okay because if you look back to marketing, 20, 30 years ago, that's where we were at. We didn't know where, all this technical tracking came in place. I think you should have really clear and simple focus areas for your inbound and outbound teams. So, as we talked about, you have your ICP. That should be the core focus of both teams, right? You don't want to bring in customers that are not your ICP. So, that's very basic, but your outbound team usually is focused on a named account model, right? It's not a free for all, go wild, target whoever you want. It's usually a core segment of accounts that you really want to win. So,
Mhm.
that's a very strategic effort. And then your inbound team is, I would say, a little bit more flex, right? Because you call out many segments usually when you're targeting enterprise, mid market, and commercial companies also hear about you and also want to learn about your product. So a little bit more flex there, but still what we do here is our core named accounts, let's call them so, that our outbound team targets, our inbound efforts also target. So we don't want to create silos and, okay, that's your account or that's my account. Like we're trying to win the account, right? So we try to put as many touch points across channels as we can to ideally maximize the outcome or at least efficiency that we're going to see when that prospect comes through as a deal or as a customer. So I think where we go wrong is we try to have a step by step, 1, 2, 3 things that lead to a deal. And that's just not the same. I do it all the time. I love to spend time in Salesforce and understand the deal path, right? And then go and
Mhm.
and see what pages did they see, how did they do it, and I try to compare it. And all I can understand is that there is multiple paths. There are multiple touch points. The other day I was analyzing and in an opportunity s- uh, life cycle, I guess, from the moment they become an op until they're won, there's approximately 30 or so website visits in our high mid market to enterprise segment. So
Mm.
once you're already talking to an account executive, right, to a enterprise account person, you continue to visit the website, you continue to engage 30 plus times. And I tracked only a couple of contacts in these opportunities. I didn't track all the contacts. So I think that just kind of tells you that this idea of it's one source or it's another source or it's one
Mhm.
channel or the other, like change, like erase that from what you think is right, and instead think what combination, what addition of channels work best, what touch points are really valuable, and how do we get more of those in what ways of working between teams actually create a smooth experience, right? It's not inbound versus outbound, is how can inbound insights help outbound? So I think there's a lot of collaboration, but I think ultimately, how do you buy today? I think most of us that are evaluating software at all times, we bounce all the time. I know myself, I open incognito tabs all the time to explore because I know the game. I'm in the
Mm.
game. I don't wanna set off any
Yeah.
signals until I'm ready to do so. So, I think we just have to understand that buyers are just like us. We wanna provide a great experience, so we just have to be willing to understand that it's complex and that it's not a perfect formula each time.
Really appreciate the depth you went into there.
Yeah.
Um, a s- Really close to this topic, similar, same topic, just a specific branch. The I think the typical demand gen, like titles are really messy. That's a not topic for another time. But demand gen, revenue marketing, growth marketing, there's crisp definitions out there. But for all intents and purposes, focus people that are gold marketers gold on pipeline. They're also gold on, like, many times, driving awareness, right?
Right?
Demand creation versus demand capture. And you mentioned it before. We went through the ZERP days where you could spend a lot of money and you didn't necessarily have to show as much for those same dollars as you do today.
Yeah.
So, what are your suggestions for marketers who maybe feel rightly or wrongly that, gosh, I just have to, slap a form on everything that I do so that I can show that my efforts led to revenue, right? People who feel like they're just constrained by the expectation, whether it's internally, right, from executives or cross team counterparts, that they have to show this conversion event. When you and I, it sounds like, both agree or know that a lot of the magic happens well before that form fill occurs, right? Or that 15th website visit occurs. Um, what are your suggestions for those team members in terms of, like, what should they measure? How do they educate? You've talked about it's important to communicate marketing's job internally. What are your suggestions to people who find themselves in that situation? Because I think it's a lot of people these days who want to do good marketing across the entirety of the funnel, but they feel maybe stuck or constrained because of, like, what is being asked of them, right? Or maybe wrongly they've set the wrong expectations internally. Curious to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I love this topic because I think it's something that I think is it's really simple. It's like treating you have a relationship, let's say, with someone who is telling you, "Give me $1,000 and I'll give you return," right? It's all about the trust that you establish with this person. And in that case, you are the broker, right? You're the person that is managing that investment. So if you are establishing a new relationship with someone that's giving you their money, let's assume so, to invest, I would say that the first thing you want to do is establish trust, some credibility. And that usually happens when you play your cards right and deliver at least some proof in a relatively short amount of time to tell this investor that you know what you're doing, at least, right? I think when we go start a job or try to make our CFO believe that the name of the game is brand awareness and demand creation and, like, don't ask me about leads and don't ask me about return, that's just never going to happen. Because even as ask someone to blindly invest some amount of money in something and just trust me, like, one day
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna see the results. But right now, like, I can't give you a return or any estimate, but just believe in me, right? Like that, it takes a little bit of time. It's a process, and what I usually like to do is in any role, or even if you're just trying to reset your relationship with your stakeholders, whether that's sales or finance or your managers, the first thing is make them believe in your ability to deliver results. And that happens through expectation setting and delivering those results. It's different if you just deliver the results and you never told them that would happen. That doesn't create the trust, right? It's that just happened. Oh, how come the pipeline is moving in the right direction? Oh, things must be working. That doesn't sound the same as, listen, we're going to be playing these bets in the short term. We should be seeing some sort of increase here or decrease there that will lead into more pipeline, higher conversion rate, higher deal size. And I think, within the next 90 days, I'm going to be able to see that. I'm going to send you a report without you asking every 30 days or whichever to track progress. Establish trust, deliver on what you said you would deliver on. And again, it's a little bit short-sighted, but the idea is gain trust, establish credibility. Once you do so, I would even say a couple of times, that's like your foot is in the door, right? Like the door opens. you know what you're doing in this organization, and then you begin to play your cards and tell the story of true buyer journeys. I love to ask people, like, when was the last time you clicked on an ad? And nobody knows, right? No, we don't click on ads that often. So, but that you can't start a relationship with, say, a CFO or like a very traditional CMO if like that's how you start. You got to just begin proving yourself, establishing trust and credibility. And again, think of you as a broker of investments. You're placing bets, but you have to prove yourself. And then I think once that trust is established, you also do have to give some sort of measurement, or return indicator for demand creation investments. It's not a, hey, let me spend a couple million here and just like believe in me. Like that's not how it works. You have to
Mhm.
say, if we invest here, this is the output that I'm expecting in 12 months. And how I'm going to measure it to make sure that things are going in the right direction is through these ways of measuring every X amount of time. What's also important is we forget to continue these cadences of measurement when things are going well. I'm guilty of that myself, like things are moving in the right direction. I forget completely to keep up with these cadences of measuring leading indicators for other investments. And then, like it doesn't really break anything, but it's good to keep yourself disciplined to the expectations that you set with your stakeholders. I think, again, measurement, especially of the short term, really frees up your ability and to invest more creatively in the future. But you
Mm.
have to do both at the same time.
Yeah, really appreciate. I think, yeah, really considering yourself as like as a broker of investment. That's a really good framework or a way to approach that, because that's what you are, right? If you're running paid programs, it's not your money, it's the company's money. And ultimately that company belongs to, yes, you. If you're in an earlier stage company, you've got a decent amount of, shares. Later on, like, that ownership is truly held, elsewhere. And so you need to um, be cognizant of your stakeholdership there. Um, so I guess we only a few more minutes here. Just before we get to hot takes and a kind of a lightning round of questions, I did have one more question I wanted to ask you, and it's regarding just um, the tactics. Uh, I think we've hinted at it that, buying patterns have shifted to an extent over the past few years, and I know that that's not new. That's a relatively shared perspective. But
Mhm.
with those changes, what are, just tactically speaking, to those who are out there thinking, "Gosh, I'm doing 2020, fiscal year 2026 or whatever," right? I'm doing planning. What are the tactics you're seeing kind of come in vogue right now, with, I guess, your audience, because that's what you can speak to today. I don't, because it's gonna vary, right, depending on who your audience and your buyer is. But what are some of the tactics that you're seeing success with maybe today that maybe weren't as, in vogue or as, I guess, successful, even just a few years back?
Um, I think something very tangible that most of us probably have access to is analyzing recordings of calls. I mean, I know that that's not
Mm.
a tactic, but we are all over Gong AMA. If the audience has seen it, it's usually, I think right now it's in beta. Don't quote me on it, but that means that you probably have access to it. It's an AI feature. You go into a deal and you ask certain things. For example, ask, what were the main triggers that brought this prospect to a conversation with us? What were their main, like the main pain points that they mentioned during discovery? Are you talking about that in marketing, or are you completely forgetting about the fact that they came in because they really have a pain point on reporting, and your system is actually excellent at it, but because you want to flash this new AI thing, that's all you're talking about, right? And I think that is something that we are very invested in right now. I think, it's very insightful to understand also the differences, right? If you service multiple segments, what are the needs of an enterprise prospect coming in versus a commercial prospect coming in? It can also help with a ton of other things, but I think that is a little bit tactical. It really grounds into you should put yourself in the shoes of the prospect. And as marketers, we think, oh, my sales team doesn't let me shadow calls. My customer success team doesn't want me to reach out to customers because it's like so tricky. Like, I also maybe don't have the guts to call a customer and say, "Can I have 5 minutes of your time?" But Gong is there, or whichever system you
Mm.
use to record calls. You probably have access to it today. If you don't even have AMA features or AI features, download the transcripts, upload to, AI tools and ask for summaries. Like, these are things that we all can do in like 45 minutes. And there's probably stuff that you didn't know about your audience that is there. I think that one I've been all over that the last, I would say, 2 months. So that's why I'm talking about it. And I think, um, in terms of channels, I think maybe what maybe is still not working for us, and honestly, like, we don't even invest a lot in it, is trying to push uh demand capture actions and demand creation channels. For example, like LinkedIn, we have tested on and off lead gen ads, and every single time, I think we've proved over and over again that's just not the channel where that happens.
Who's
None of them convert into pipeline. It's, again, a poor experience. So that's still not the way. And also, I spend $0 on content syndication, on gated ebook,
Mm.
um, or any sort of gated content. We actually, I think, transparently still have some of that on our site, but it's looking to get, completely updated really, really soon. But for a long time, we haven't created any sort of strategy around, let's try to get some names in the door. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
No, I love those 2 things. Those are great. Very tactical, practical advice, which is what I was asking for. So, I agree. You gotta use those gotta ground yourself in research, and research is not as far away and hard to get at as it was
Or
in the
expensive.
past, or
Yeah.
expensive, right? Right? Most people have some sort of recording tool that you have access to, and whether it has AI features or not, you can grab the transcript and throw it into ChatGPT, and like you said, ask for a table, ask for a summary, ask specific questions, and you can really move yourself forward as somebody who understands your customer very quickly. Love that. Um, okay, and you actually already I was going to ask one question about AI in marketing and sales as part of our lightning round, but you already touched on it, so we've cleared that one. But I've got two final questions in maybe our lightning round. Okay, you ready?
Let's do it.
Okay. What's a revenue marketing secret you've learned or incorporated that's led to outsized results in some way for you?
Um, it's pretty basic, but I think you have to fight for the team and not for your own goals. And by team, I mean company goals. I would even say that even though I'm accountable for pipeline, my eyes are on revenue. So
Mm.
what that means is, it's the ownership. It's We talked about it before. It's like maybe it's not your money, your investment, but act like it. It's my company. It's my money on the line.
Mhm.
What do I care about? I feel like I really think when we own that, all our demand performance really improves because we're focused on what actually matters. So I think while we are focused on a number, make sure that you also have a good ground on what actually matters to the company. Do they really care what came inbound? Or do they want to close more business, right? And they
Mm.
want to understand how to do more of that. So think ground yourself in the goal of the team over your own goal. That always leads to success.
Absolutely. Love that. Don't get wrapped around the axle of self-promotion and at the expense of overall goal and company promotion.
Hmm.
Um, and what is a strongly held belief or a hill you're willing to die on with respect to go-to-market strategy or execution?
Since we just covered it, I am very against gating anything. Again, transparently, when I was at Docebo, I was a few years ago, I was the one gating everything. I would fight to gate everything. That was me. I wanted the emails, I wanted the leads, I counted ebook downloads. Today, I am willing to die on a hill for ungating everything that is actually valuable for our prospect. So I think this idea of, it's we did it so well, it's so near and dear to our hearts, we better ask for an email. I think there are a few exceptions where, if it improves the experience of the prospect, if it's some sort of product-led experience where they save their progress, sure. But if we're talking about just pure content that is even awesome, like why are you gating it? Um, I think, there's many companies that are still willing to die on the hill of let's gate absolutely everything.
Okay. Well, with that, that's another wrap on Go-to-Market Mavericks, and we will see you next time. Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you.